Hello everyone, it's Ty. Last year around this time, Star Rail 3.4 gave us the long-awaited Fate collab and a brand new extra-planar Husbando in Archer. So it comes as a bit of a surprise that this year we're getting similar treatment as 4.4 is bringing us another new extra-planar Husbando in Gilgamesh. Unfortunately, I know even less about his role in the Fate multiverse than I do about Archer. And I barely know anything about Archer. But I do know Star Rail, so I think I'm qualified enough to go over his kit, light coning gear options, some team suggestions, and give my free-to-play Husbando recommendation for this Gilgamesh guy. I don't know. Gilgamesh has the rare distinction of being one of only two lightning destruction characters in the game. But since Arlen is only a 4-star, that does mean he's the first 5-star lightning destruction character ever. So I guess that's something. Unfortunately, it also leads me to think that maybe being lightning destruction just carries some kind of developmental curse? It's not that he's bad as such, it's just that, well, his main gimmick is his interest mechanic. When Gilgamesh's teammates take action, or when anyone uses their ultimates, Gilgamesh gains points of interest. Before reaching 10 points of interest in a battle, Gilgamesh will automatically use his basic attack on his turn. That basic attack deals 100% attack to a single target. But it's also, for the most part, irrelevant, because you'll barely ever actually manage to use his basic attack. Once he reaches 10 points of interest, he enters the interest-peaked state for the rest of the fight, and in this state, he can only use his skill. All that is to say, in most situations, you'll never actually see him using his basic attack, and really, if you do, something's probably gone wrong. Each point of interest also increases his speed by 10%, but don't get too excited. While that sounds incredible, it doesn't really mean a lot in the grand scheme of his placement in the action order, because all of his interest and all of that speed is lost when he uses his skill. So, effectively, he'll still always have his turn at the same time. His skill costs 0 SP and gives himself a 30% def ignore buff for 3 turns before doing a blast attack dealing 280% attack to the main target and 140% attack to adjacent targets. That's some pretty good damage, but he gets his real oomph from his ultimate, which deals 400% attack to all enemies and 10 additional instances of 100% attack to random enemies. A 1400% multiplier does put him in the ranks of highest total ultimate multipliers in the game, but at a cost of 360 energy, that also puts him in the ranks of highest energy cost ultimates. His major trace, Epic's Opening, helps with that a bit. Not only does it allow him to gain interest when he uses his own ultimate and gives him an extra 2 interest when his allies use their ults, it also gives him 30% of the energy cost of the ults used by allies. This, it turns out, will be the main way that he gains energy. Hero's Hutur gives him a 25% crit damage buff for each point of interest he gains, stacking up to 6. Basically, it's 150% crit damage for free. And finally, Hegemon's Strife borders on actually making him useful as a buffer. He gives all allies a base 20% attack and 20% crit damage buff. Not great, but still not too shabby. But characters with max energy greater than 140 gain 1% increase to that buff for every 1 point over 140 up to a maximum of 100%. Now that sounds amazing, right? 120% attack and 120% crit damage? Sure, for a very select few characters. The vast majority of characters have max energy of 140 or below. And many who are above 140 are just barely above, meaning maybe an extra 10 or 20% to the buff. And sure, that's definitely something, but to get the full benefit of this buff, a character must have 240 or more max energy. And that pool of characters is very limited. It does include Gilgamesh himself, so that's pretty fantastic for him, but it also just so happens to include Saber. That's right, we have to address the elephant in the room. Unfortunately, Gilgamesh's power budget was heavily tuned around being a sub-DPS support for Saber. Not only does his buffing utility only apply to the small list of characters that happens to include Saber, but when Saber's on the team, Gilgamesh gains a special ability. When he or Saber attack, they accumulate a tally. And once that tally reaches 8, the two of them launch a follow-up attack to all enemies, Gilgamesh gains 3 points of interest, and Saber gains 120 energy and a 200% damage bonus to her next ultimate. It's not that big of a deal exactly. He's still perfectly capable without her. But a lot of people have already given him the Jiao Cho treatment, basically seeing him as nothing more than a Saber slave and only ever talking about him in terms of his usefulness to Saber. I just don't want to perpetuate that idea. So instead, we'll just move on to his Eidolons, which are kinda His E1 is pretty nice, making his 30% def ignore apply to the entire team, as well as increasing his attack by another 60% and regenerating 40 energy when he uses his skill. But 30% def ignore seems like a thing they've just been handing out like candy between Ashvale, Mortonak's Blade, and the Welt Nova Flare, so the only thing that this would really be considered useful for is the increase to his own damage output. E2 increases his interest accrual by starting him off in battle with 5 and giving an extra 5 when he ults. This is mostly useful for getting him into interest peaked quicker, but with the right teams, that's never a problem anyway, and after he's in interest peaked, the extra interest doesn't do all that much either. E2 also gives him an increase to the damage multipliers for his skill, and that's great as well, but either way, it doesn't really feel all that worth it for his E2. E4 increases his energy regen, which would be really great if it wasn't at E4, and E6 gives his teams a 20% all-type res pen buff, and increases his ult damage tremendously. But yeah, that's E6. Overall, I think Gilgamesh is just a solid DPS. He doesn't really bring anything interesting to the table unless you're using him as a Saber support, and even that's debatable. His ultimate damage is rather impressive, but his playstyle feels like he might end up outpaced rather quickly because he doesn't really do anything that would set him apart. As such, my free-to-play Husbando recommendation would be to get his free copy and enjoy him for as long as you can at E0S0. If you have an abundance of pulls, you might consider E0S1 just for completion's sake, but you don't want to find yourself in a situation where you're out of pulls for Wave Venturine. Of course, if you're not interested in Wave Venturine, then getting E0S1 will probably be a safe investment. And don't forget, the Fate banners will last for a long time, so getting S1 can just be something that you plan for later when you're sure that there's no one else that you have to save pulls for. Thankfully, his signature isn't one of those where the character is incomplete without it. It provides him with 18% attack and 10% energy regeneration rate at base, and the fact that the ER is more valuable than the attack is a solid indicator of how the rest of this light cone is going to go. When the wearer uses an ultimate, it increases the damage of that ultimate by 0.2% for every energy consumed, up to 72%. Which just so happens to mean your ultimate needs to cost 360 energy to get the full 72% damage bonus. Basically, it ensures that only Gilgamesh, and I guess Saber, can use this light cone fully. And finally, when using ultimate, the entire team gains a 24% crit damage buff. It's not terrible, but it's also not so impactful for him that it's required. Frankly, the only reason I recommend getting it at all is because there are just so few viable free-to-play destruction options. The de facto 5-star free-to-play option is on the Fall of an Aeon. It gives up to 64% attack, already way better than his own signature, and a possible 24% damage bonus if he breaks an enemy. It's a fantastic option for him, but it's also the best free-to-play light cone for a lot of other destruction characters, and there's only one of it to go around. Your next best bets are, unfortunately, banner cones. If you manage to have it at S5, the moles welcome you can give up to a whopping 72% attack. But it's immensely finicky, because in order to get all 3 stacks of Mischievous, you would have to use a basic attack. And since you can't use basic attack after he enters Interest Peaked, you have to effectively stagger your playstyle to allow him to get a turn in before that happens. And since his best teams are doing follow-up attacks regularly, that may be impossible. But 2 stacks of Mischievous is still 48% attack, which is still respectable. Your other banner option is Under the Blue Sky, which only gives 32% attack at S5, but also gives 24% crit rate on kill. Unfortunately, that's only useful in fights where you're getting kills at least once every 3 turns. And that's basically all he's got. But what about the shop cones, you may ask? Well, that's the problem. They're all for niches that don't really apply to him. Flames Afar doesn't do anything unless you drain your HP when attacking. Ninja Record relies on the character losing HP or being healed, and Woof Walk Time requires the enemy to have a burn or bleed on them. Maybe the next time we get new shop cones, they'll add a normal destruction cone, but for now, he heavily relies on Fall of an Aeon or on banner cones if you're not getting his signature. Thankfully, for gear, he's a lot easier to deal with. His best option will be 4-piece Scholar Lost in Erudition. Because he self-buffs his attack and crit damage throughout his kit, the crit rate on the 2-piece is far more useful to him than most anything else, and the 4-piece skill and ult damage are right up his street. Navigator might seem like a good fit since it buffs his ultimate damage, but Gilgamesh will never have more than 1 stack, and Scholar's 20% is objectively better than Navigator's 18. For planers, he gets himself a bespoke set in the new Cosmic Life Sciences Institute. When the wearer has max energy greater than or equal to 200, they get a damage bonus of 0.2% for every point exceeding 200, up to 32%. And would you look at that? In order to get the maximum buff from this set, you need to be one of the 3 characters in the game with 360 or more max energy. And Gilgamesh just happens to be one of them. What are the odds? But of course, with it being new, you mayn't have any yet, so he can also take advantage of Inert Salsato until you farm up a set for him. He definitely loves the crit rate, and the ultimate damage will do for the time being. For stats, he'll want crit rate body, attack percent boots, lightning damage orb, and an attack percent rope. Since he gains a speed bonus from points of interest, and the speed bonus gained is based entirely on his base speed, he can safely use attack percent boots. And while he seems like he'd want an ER rope, his main energy gains come from ally ults, and that value isn't affected by energy regen, so it's better to use an attack percent rope for the damage. Plus, it's a hell of a lot easier to get an attack percent rope than an ER rope. For substats, you'll mostly want crit rate to 100%, and then attack percent and crit damage to taste. Since he comes out of the box with a 120% attack buff and 270% crit damage buff on him, he's really not wanting for stats, so at least he's easy to gear. Gilgamesh's whole deal is letting his team do stuff until he deigns to do something himself. So he really flourishes in teams that take a lot of actions, but beyond that, he doesn't really have any stringent requirements. Follow-up sustains are great, like Aventurine and Tenghuang, or Permancer Teray, and he doesn't need to take damage or get heals, and so he loves the shields. But he works just fine with healers if there happen to be other characters in the team who do need heals. For supports, he definitely appreciates anyone who gives energy, like Sunday, but he also really likes ultimate damage, so Jiao Cho or Mortonak's Blade are also quite useful. Of course, Mortonak's Blade is a support god in all ways anyway, but his follow-up attacks do wonders to getting Gilgamesh's interest stacks up. For more follow-up-y attackers, we have Ashvale, as he has become the follow-up king of version 4, plus with the extra Def Shred and crit damage, one could technically count him as a support. Similarly, there's the oft-forgotten Moza, who also gives crit damage at E2, but most importantly, whose action count is very high. And of course, Dr. Ratio. Characters with summons or memo sprites are also useful to him. Remembrance MC or Jing'an, for instance, increase the number of allies on the team and therefore result in more actions. And for some Fate fun, you could try a team with Archer. Gilgamesh won't be stealing any of Archer's SP, but he also won't be generating any. But Archer does benefit from nearly the whole of Gilgamesh's buffs, and Gilgamesh gets a lot of interest and energy from Archer. Basically, Gilgamesh wants characters who take lots of actions and use lots of ults. If you can build a team that does that, then he'll pull off some pretty good damage for you, and that's about all. Gilgamesh looks like he'll be a nice addition to the roster, but at this point, he hasn't really impressed me. I certainly love that we're getting another Husbando that works so well in this developing Husbando team of Ashvale, Mortonak's Blade, and now Gilgamesh. I just don't know that he'll stand the test of time and become a lightning DPS that replaces Jingyuan. But, as with Archer, a free Husbando is a free Husbando, and you can't say fairer than that. I definitely hope to discover unexpected ways to make use of him, but what about you? Are you way more hyped for Gilgamesh because you know of him from Fate? Or maybe you're going to take the free Archer E1 instead? Let me know in the comments. And that's my little guide on Gilgamesh. I've apparently given up trying for quick and breezy, but hopefully you still found it entertaining or informative. Either way, thanks so much for watching. If you like this sort of thing, please like and subscribe. Hit that bell to be notified when I post more things of this or any other nature. Next week will be another 6-month Hoyo Husbando review. So if you want to see that, you can come back and, well, see that. Anywho, thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you all again next time. Bye!